The first time I noticed it, the construction barrier was planted 30 feet into my backyard. Karen Thorne had somehow transferred a portion of my land to a developer without my permission or awareness. By the time I uncovered the full extent of her deception, I had taken ownership of the ground beneath her house. Let me tell you how it began. My name is Elliot Vance. I'm 44, a private land surveyor with 2 decades of experience in property research and boundary disputes. Following my divorce 2 years ago, I relocated to Glenmore Reserve with my 17-year-old daughter, Naomi. This gated community nestled in North Carolina's wine region seemed ideal. Serene streets, mature trees, and what I assumed was competent HOA leadership. I couldn't have been more mistaken about that last part. The issue arose one Tuesday morning in March. I went into the backyard to inspect the oak trees and was startled to see a vivid orange construction barrier extending across what should have been my back property line. But something looked very wrong. The fencing reached deep into the wooded part of my land, cutting off the area where Naomi and I had intended to build a workshop for her design projects. I took out my phone and immediately called the HOA office. "This is Elliot Vance from Magnolia Drive. There's a construction fence running through my yard." "Let me review our files," the secretary said with clear disinterest. "Mrs. Thorne oversees all building permits. She'll return your call within 24 hours. 24 hours! This is my land we're talking about. I'm sorry, sir. Mrs. Thorne is extremely busy with community affairs. She'll get in touch as soon as possible." Karen Thorne served as HOA president. She was 59 and had ruled over Glenmore Reserve for nearly 10 years. Her home was the largest in the area, a grand colonial with flawless landscaping, and she treated the HOA like her own private domain. Everyone in the neighborhood was familiar with her obsession over trivial details, from mailbox paint colors to the frequency of lawn trimming. That night, Naomi was working on her school architecture assignment and pulled out my old survey files to double-check the dimensions of our lot for a model. "Dad, come look at this," she said, spreading the original plat map on the kitchen table. "It shows we have 30 feet of woods beyond our fence, but that new construction fence slices right through it." I carefully reviewed the 1998 survey, relying on my professional judgment to verify the numbers. Naomi was spot on. The barrier intruded 30 feet into our land, which was indisputably ours according to the legal documents. "This isn't right," I muttered. "You can't just shift a boundary line unless both parties sign off." Could it be an error? Maybe, but after years of handling boundary fights, I know when something stinks. The following morning, I knocked on Karen's front door. She answered wearing a pale blazer over dark trousers, her trademark pearl necklace sparkling in the morning light. She looked like a model from a country club catalog, impeccable hair and flawless makeup even at dawn. "Mr. Vance, what brings you here this morning?" "There's a construction fence 30 feet into my backyard. It needs to be removed immediately." Karen kept smiling, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Ah, yes, that issue. The HOA authorized a small boundary change for utility improvement. Everything is perfectly legitimate and transparent. I was never informed of any boundary modification. That land is mine. All residents impacted were properly notified per our formal procedures. Maybe you missed the notice in your mail?" "I check my mail daily. No such letter arrived." "Well, the postal system isn't always reliable. I'll ask my assistant to retrieve the files and send you all relevant paperwork. I assure you everything was done according to our regulations." Her overly smooth tone set off alarm bells. With 2 decades of experience in land disputes, I could sense a shady boundary manipulation a mile away. Karen was far too composed for something that should have required my written approval. "I expect to see those documents today," I stated firmly. "Certainly. Everything will be prepared for you by this afternoon. You'll see that the procedures were entirely proper." Later that day, I visited the county courthouse to examine the official property records. What I uncovered in the clerk's office chilled me to the core. According to the public documents, an easement on my land had been transferred to Darius King, a local real estate developer known for high-end projects. The transaction had taken place 3 weeks earlier and featured a consent form with what appeared to be my signature. The problem? I never signed such a form. I scrutinized the papers under a magnifying lens, using the same fraud detection methods I'd learned over years of surveying. The signature was a passable imitation. Someone had clearly studied my handwriting. But the notary seal belonged to a company I'd never dealt with. and the document was backdated to create the illusion I had approved the deal months before. Karen Thorne had forged my name and unlawfully handed over 30 feet of my land. I immediately contacted Margaret Pine, a real estate attorney I had previously collaborated with on several property disputes. She was known for being relentless and precise. "Elliot, this is blatant fraud," she said after reviewing the scanned copies I'd sent. "But proving it in court will be tricky. Do you know how they might have gotten your signature?" "I signed HOA paperwork when I bought the place. They may have lifted my signature from one of those." "That sounds likely. We'll need to file a quiet title lawsuit to overturn the transfer, but first we'll have to gather solid proof. Fraud requires rock-solid evidence." "What sort of proof are we talking about?" "Bank statements, emails, anything that demonstrates this was intentional fraud, not just a clerical error." That night, I broke the news to Naomi. Her reaction was explosive, angrier than I'd seen her since the divorce. "They just stole our land? Are they allowed to do that?" "Not legally, but they did it anyway. Now we have to show it was intentional deception." "What about the developer? He must have known it wasn't Karen's land to sell." "That's exactly what I plan to find out. Tomorrow I'm confronting him." "I want to come. I want to see the man who thinks it's okay to build on our yard." "This could get tense, sweetheart." "Good. I'm done watching people treat us like we don't matter." The next morning, Naomi and I drove over to the site just behind our property. There stood Darius King, overseeing the workers. He was a stocky man in his 50s, decked out in an expensive suit despite the muddy ground. He radiated wealth, the kind of man who bulldozed through opposition with lawyers and intimidation. "Mr. King, I'm Elliot Vance. You're carrying out construction on land that belongs to me." He opened a bulky folder with practiced calm. "I hold a valid deed for this parcel, legally acquired from the Glenmore Reserve HOA. Everything was cleared through official procedures. The HOA didn't have the authority to sell that land. It's my property." "That's not what Karen Thorne conveyed to me. She claimed you had signed a release agreeing to the boundary realignment. She presented the documentation." "I never authorized any such waiver. That signature was falsified." For a brief moment, King's self-assured expression wavered, though he quickly composed himself. "Listen, I paid 60 grand for this lot. If there's a title discrepancy, take it up with the HOA. I'm simply the purchaser. The issue is you're erecting structures on land that was obtained through fraud. You're making serious claims. I suggest you consult an attorney before proceeding." "I already have, and she's very curious how you ended up with forged paperwork." King's face lost color. "Forged? What are you accusing me of?" "The consent form that supposedly has my signature? It's fabricated. Karen Thorne committed fraud to pass my property off as hers. I had no clue. Karen insisted everything was completely above board." "What did she tell you exactly?" King glanced around uneasily as though expecting Karen to materialize. "She explained that you were struggling financially after your divorce and needed to offload part of your land fast. She said the HOA was managing the sale to keep things simple." "Did she advise you to keep the deal quiet?" "She said it would help avoid unnecessary gossip during your rough patch. Claimed she was just trying to protect your privacy." It was all coming together. Karen had manipulated King with the same lies she used to cover her tracks with me, exploiting my personal situation to justify a suspicious transaction. Later that day, I delved into property records from the original subdivision established in 1987. What I uncovered shifted everything. It turned out my father had clashed with the HOA over this same strip of land 2 decades earlier when the board tried to construct a communal storage shed. The woods behind our property were protected under a grandfathered clause that explicitly prohibited any development or conveyance. The land had been designated as permanent green space that could never be transferred. Karen Thorne knew this. As a recurring signatory on official HOA documents, she'd signed off on the original charter herself, which clearly stated that those wooded areas were exempt from boundary revisions. I called Margaret to share the discovery. "This significantly strengthens our case," she told me. "But we'll still need to establish that Karen acted with intentional fraud rather than innocent error." "What kind of proof would that require?" "Phone logs, emails, financial records indicating her link to the developer. Anything that shows this was a calculated act. I think I can dig that up. Give me a couple of days. That evening, Naomi stumbled across something intriguing while reviewing incorporation records for a school assignment on civic planning. "Dad, check this out," she said, pointing at her laptop. "The original Glenmore Reserve HOA was shut down in 1994 due to financial issues. The current one is a separate entity, formed under a new charter with different governance rules." What's the implication here? It means Karen's been operating under old, possibly invalid authority for years. The updated charter may not even let her authorize land sales. You're certain? Look at the timeline. The initial charter expired in '94, and the replacement wasn't filed until a year later. There's a full year when legally no HOA was in place. That doesn't make sense. How has she been running things? Either she's clueless, or she's pretending the old rules still apply. The next day, I visited the county clerk's office with Elsie Marlowe, a retired clerk who'd helped me track down obscure records in the past. Elsie knew how to navigate every dusty archive and forgotten drawer in that building. "There's something fishy going on with these HOA accounts," Elsie muttered as she flipped through a pile of documents she'd pulled from an old cabinet. Karen Thorne bought her own lot using HOA resources in 2003, then transferred the deed to herself through a front company. Is that even legal? Not if she used HOA funds to acquire private property. That's textbook self-dealing and violates nonprofit governance laws. Can we prove it? Banking records are publicly available if you know where to search, and I do. We spent over 3 hours combing through financial statements, tax filings, and incorporation files. What emerged was a long-term pattern of questionable transactions stretching back nearly 15 years. Karen had repeatedly used HOA funds to buy up land around the community, later transferring it to companies under her control. She had been quietly siphoning money from the community for years, enriching herself while steadily raising dues on homeowners. That night, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Vance, it's Darius King. We need to talk." "About what?" "That land deal with Karen Thorne. I've been rethinking our conversation and some things aren't sitting right. I recorded a few of our calls just to protect myself. You might want to hear them." "What kind of recordings?" "Let's meet tomorrow, 9 a.m. at the cafe on Main. I'll bring the device." We met at a cozy coffee shop in Glenmore's Old Town Center. King appeared visibly uneasy, checking the door as if Karen might walk in. "I make it a habit to record business calls in case of legal disputes," he said, sliding over a small digital recorder. "Karen rang me up last month about your land. Take a listen." I inserted the earbuds and hit play. Her voice came through with perfect clarity, calm and self-assured. "The Vance lot is ideal for your pool house project, Darius. It's basically useless land, just weeds and trees. Elliot's going through a tough period with his divorce and is strapped for cash. I'll take care of the paperwork and ensure everything moves forward without a hitch." "Are you completely sure he's willing to sell?" "He won't have a say in the matter. I'll make sure the deal goes through. Cooperation or not." "What do you mean, Karen?" "Let me handle the technicalities. Just be prepared to break ground once I give the go-ahead. And remember, this conversation stays between us until everything is finalized." That recording was undeniable proof of calculated deception. Karen had orchestrated the theft of my land from the outset, using my divorce as a convenient excuse for her plot. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked King. "Because I don't want to be implicated in a criminal scheme. Karen guaranteed me exclusive development rights to that parcel, but if it turns out to be unlawfully acquired, I could lose my builder's license and face legal consequences." "What else did she offer you?" "She promised to support my bid for the new community center contract. She said if I cooperated with her plan and didn't raise questions, I'd be awarded the $50,000 construction deal." "So she tried to bribe you?" "I didn't think of it that way at the time. She made it seem like a friendly business favor." King, too, had been deceived, entangled in Karen's network of manipulation and half-truths. But now, he was my linchpin in exposing her. I delivered the recording to Margaret Pine immediately. After hearing the entire clip, she said, "This changes the game. We can now pursue felony charges, fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful conversion of property. And what about reclaiming my land? With this evidence, that should be easy, but I believe we can do far more than just get your property returned." "What are you suggesting?" If Karen has misappropriated HOA funds for years, every homeowner may have grounds for legal action. We could dismantle her entire scheme and recover significant damages. How do we begin? We follow the paper trail, trace every transaction, and uncover what she's hidden. Over the following week, I discreetly began acquiring land surrounding Karen's enclave through a newly registered LLC. I bought 3 tax-delinquent lots in foreclosure, paying in cash to keep things low profile. These parcels included deeded access to Karen's exclusive cul-de-sac, giving me the legal footing to contest any future development plans. My goal wasn't just to reclaim what was mine, it was to topple Karen's entire structure of corruption. Meanwhile, Karen remained blissfully unaware. At the next HOA meeting, she delivered her usual upbeat report, bragging about neighborhood upgrades and rising home values. Our collaboration with distinguished developers like Darius King is helping Glenmore Reserve maintain its prestige, she told an audience of about 30 residents. Home prices have climbed 12% in the last year thanks to our strategic leadership. Some homeowners voiced concerns about the construction near my property. Karen, unfazed, answered smoothly with rehearsed deflections. Mr. Vance's boundary realignment was approved following thorough internal review. Some individuals naturally resist change, but we can't allow isolated objections to derail progress that benefits the broader community. What sort of improvements are we talking about? Asked Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street. The modification enhances access to utilities and improves drainage efficiency. It's a specialized matter that might not be easy to grasp without technical training. After the meeting, Naomi approached Karen with her phone camera under the guise of filming for a school assignment on civic governance. Mrs. Thorne, can you explain how boundary modifications work? She asked, playing the role of a curious student. Oh, it's quite simple, dear. When a homeowner requests changes for utility access or property upgrades, the HOA has the authority to approve adjustments that serve the community's interest. And who determines what counts as serving the community? The board evaluates every proposal independently, looking at factors like home values, aesthetics, and general improvements. Of course, people like your father can become overly emotional about relatively minor shifts. That's why professional management is essential for objective decisions. But don't homeowners have to give permission before changes are made to their lots? Well, yes, technically, but by choosing to live in a community like this, residents agree to certain rules and processes. Your father acknowledged those terms when he moved in. But what if someone never actually approved a specific change? Karen's smile tightened. I'm sure once your father reviews the documents, he'll understand. Sometimes mail gets misplaced, but we maintain impeccable records. Naomi recorded every word. Karen's smug tone and blatant dishonesty were caught in full detail, including her subtle admission that owner consent was legally necessary. 2 weeks later, a certified envelope arrived demanding I pay $1,500 in boundary adjustment processing fees tied to my property. I called Karen immediately, this time letting my anger be heard. I'm not paying a cent for fake paperwork. Mr. Vance, your continued defiance of valid HOA procedures is disrupting the harmony of our community. If you don't remit payment within 10 business days, we'll be forced to file a lien against your property. You want to place a lien on land you illegally seized? There's no need for inflammatory language. The adjustment followed all proper guidelines. What guidelines? Show me exactly where it says in the HOA charter you can sell someone's property without their written approval. The board holds broad powers to manage shared assets in service of the neighborhood. My backyard isn't a shared resource. It's my land. That's open to legal interpretation. No, Karen, that's not interpretation. That's criminal fraud. And then she said something that exposed just how far she'd fallen. Mr. Vance, I think it's important you know that your daughter has been spreading damaging rumors about me throughout the neighborhood. That sort of behavior could seriously impact her future. Are you threatening my daughter? I'm merely saying actions have consequences. Young people who make reckless accusations against respected officials often find their reputations can follow them to college and even into their careers. You stay away from Naomi. Of course, I only have her welfare in mind. It would be unfortunate if her college opportunities were harmed by her association with questionable individuals. The threat couldn't have been clearer. Karen was implying she'd jeopardize Naomi's college future if I didn't drop the investigation. Her entitlement was staggering. She truly believed she could get away with seizing my property, charging me bogus fees for it, and intimidating my daughter when I dared to push back. But going after Naomi was her worst misstep. I called Agent Chen without hesitation and relayed the conversation. "That qualifies as witness intimidation," Agent Chen confirmed. "It's a federal offense, and it gives us the justification to move faster. We're moving the raids up to next week." The orange fencing stretched 30 feet deep into my yard before I even noticed it. Somehow, Karen Thorne had orchestrated the sale of a portion of my land to a developer, without my approval or even my awareness. By the time I'd peeled back all the layers of her fraud, I legally owned the land beneath her own home. Here's how it unfolded. My name is Elliot Vance. I'm 44, a licensed land surveyor specializing in title disputes and property lines. 2 years after finalizing my divorce, I relocated to Glenmore Reserve with Naomi, my 17-year-old daughter. Located in North Carolina's wine region, the gated community looked ideal. Quiet roads, old-growth trees, and what I assumed was a professionally run HOA. That last assumption couldn't have been more wrong. Everything started to unravel one Tuesday morning in March, when I walked outside to check on the oak trees in my yard. A vivid construction fence had been installed directly along what should have been the back edge of my property, but something looked completely wrong. It didn't stop where it should have. Rather, it ran deep into my wooded lot, blocking off the exact area where Naomi and I had planned to build a studio for her architecture projects. Without delay, I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. "This is Elliot Vance on Magnolia Drive. There's a construction fence slicing right through my backyard." "I'll need to consult our records," said the receptionist flatly. "Mrs. Thorne is responsible for all building permits. She'll get back to you within a day." "A full day? This concerns my land." "Sorry, sir. Mrs. Thorne is currently handling important community matters. She'll return your call when she's available." Karen Thorne held the title of HOA president. At 59 years old, she had maintained control of Glenmore Reserve for nearly 10 years. Her house was the largest and most meticulously landscaped in the entire neighborhood, and she ruled the HOA as if it were her private monarchy. Her reputation for obsessing over trivial details, like mailbox paint and mowing schedules, was well known to every resident. That evening, while Naomi worked on a school project for her architecture class, she pulled out some of my older surveying maps to help model our property's footprint. "Dad, take a look," she said, spreading out the original plat on the kitchen counter. "It says we have 30 feet of wooded land past the fence line, but the construction fence cuts straight through that." I inspected the 1998 survey map using my trained eye, checking every figure. Naomi was spot on. That fence invaded 30 feet into land that, per legal documents, was unmistakably ours. "This isn't right," I said. "You can't just shift a boundary line unless both property owners agree." "Maybe someone made a mistake?" "Maybe. But I've handled enough boundary cases to know when something doesn't smell right." The next morning, I knocked on Karen's door. She answered in a cream blazer and tailored dark pants, her trademark pearl necklace catching the sunlight. She looked like she'd been styled straight from a luxury lifestyle catalog, every detail flawless, even at that early hour. "Mr. Vance," she said politely, "what can I do for you today?" "There's a construction fence 30 feet into my yard. It needs to be taken down immediately." Karen's pleasant smile didn't fade, but I caught a flash of something calculated in her expression. "Ah, yes, that issue. The HOA approved a small boundary shift to improve utility routing. Everything is fully compliant and legitimate. I was never informed of any boundary shift. That land is mine. All homeowners impacted were notified in accordance with our established procedures. Perhaps the notice got lost in your mail?" "I check my mailbox daily. Nothing was ever sent." "Well, the postal service isn't always reliable. I'll ask my assistant to pull the documents and send them over. But rest assured, everything was handled appropriately by our standards." Something in her tone set off alarms in my head. After 20 years of dealing with land disputes, I knew the scent of fraud. Karen was being far too polished about something that absolutely required my approval. "I want those records today," I said firmly. "Of course. I'll make sure everything is ready for you this afternoon." You'll see the proper steps were taken. That same afternoon, I went to the county courthouse to investigate the records myself. What I discovered at the clerk's desk turned my stomach. The official files indicated that an easement on my land had been sold to Darius King, a developer known for building lavish additions for high-end clients. The transaction had taken place 3 weeks earlier and included what looked like my signature on a form consenting to the transfer. But the truth was simple. I had never signed any such form. I closely examined the paperwork using a magnifier, relying on my fraud detection skills. The signature was a decent imitation. Someone had studied my handwriting. But the notary stamp came from a firm I'd never worked with, and the form itself was backdated to make it look like I'd signed off on the sale months ago. Karen Thorne had forged my name and unlawfully handed off 30 feet of my land. I reached out to Margaret Pine right away, a seasoned real estate attorney I'd worked with before. She had a fierce reputation for handling complex cases. "Elliot, this is clearly fraud," she said after reviewing the scans I emailed. "But proving it in court won't be easy. Any idea how they got a sample of your signature?" "I signed a few HOA documents when I moved in. They could have copied it from those." "That's likely. We'll need to file a quiet title lawsuit to nullify the transfer, but first, we need rock-solid proof. Fraud cases require overwhelming documentation." "What kind of proof are we talking about?" "Financial records, emails, anything that shows this wasn't just a clerical mistake, but a deliberate act." That evening, I told Naomi everything. Her anger flared more than I'd seen since the divorce. "They took our land? Can they just do that?" "They can't legally, but they did. Now we have to prove it was criminal." "What about the developer? He has to know he bought land that wasn't up for sale." "That's exactly what I'm going to find out. Tomorrow, I'm confronting him face to face. I'm coming with you. I want to meet the guy who thinks he can build on our land." "This could get tense, honey." "Good. I'm tired of people treating us like we're invisible." The next day, Naomi and I headed out to the construction site behind our home. Darius King stood in the mud overseeing his crew. He was a thick-set man in his 50s, decked out in a pricey suit that clashed with the filthy conditions. He looked every bit the man who used legal threats to get what he wanted. "Mr. King, I'm Elliot Vance. You're putting up a building on my land." He calmly retrieved a bulky folder of paperwork. "I hold a legitimate deed for this parcel, purchased lawfully through the Glenmore Reserve HOA. Everything was processed using the correct legal steps. That land was never theirs to sell. It's part of my property." "That's not what Karen Thorne told me. She claimed you had already signed a release for the boundary change. She even showed me the documents." "I've never signed any release. That signature was forged." King's assured demeanor wavered slightly before he regained his composure. "Listen, I paid 60 grand for this lot. If there's a title issue, you'll need to sort that out with the HOA. I'm just the purchaser here. The issue is that you're constructing on land that was taken illegally. You're making serious allegations. I suggest you speak to a lawyer before continuing." "I already did, and she's very curious how you ended up with forged paperwork." The color drained from King's face. "Forged? What are you implying?" "The consent form with my signature, it's a forgery. Karen Thorne committed fraud to transfer my property to you." I had no idea. She promised everything was above board." "What exactly did she tell you?" King's eyes darted nervously as though Karen could be lurking nearby. "She told me you were having financial trouble following your divorce and needed to sell off a portion of your lot quickly. She said the HOA was managing everything to make it easier for you." "Did she ask you to keep it confidential?" "She said it would be best to avoid gossip in the neighborhood during your personal crisis. Claimed she was just trying to respect your privacy." It all started to make sense. Karen had deceived King the same way she misled me by spinning lies about my life to cover up the inconsistencies in the sale. But then King said something that chilled me. "There's more. Karen told me she's planning to buy out other homes nearby. She said your lot was just the beginning of a much bigger expansion project." "What sort of expansion?" "She wants to construct high-end condos on the rear lots of multiple properties. Said the HOA had the power of eminent domain and could force sales if owners didn't cooperate voluntarily." Naomi clutched my arm. "Dad, that's illegal, right?" "Absolutely. HOAs don't have eminent domain authority. Not even close." King shifted uncomfortably. She also mentioned having connections at the county planning office, claimed she could fast-track permits for large-scale builds. This wasn't just about my backyard anymore. Karen was trying to reshape the entire neighborhood, pushing out families to make way for dense development. That afternoon, I dove into property archives from the original 1987 subdivision. What I uncovered changed everything and laid bare the full extent of Karen's criminal scheme. 20 years ago, my father had fought the HOA over the same strip of land when they attempted to erect a communal storage unit. The files revealed something I hadn't expected. Karen had been part of the HOA board back then, too. She had been planning this scheme for decades. The woods behind our home were protected by a legacy clause that explicitly forbade any sale or development. That land had been legally designated as permanent conservation space, but I found modified amendments to the charter, clearly tampered with, all signed by Karen in her role as witness, removing those protections. Even worse, I found evidence that 3 neighboring households had sold sections of their land in the last 2 years. When I compared their consent forms to mine, every single one showed signs of signature manipulation using the same forgery style. Karen wasn't just guilty of stealing from me. She had defrauded multiple families in a coordinated attempt to assemble land for a massive construction project. I called Margaret with the update. "This significantly strengthens our position," she said, "but we'll still need to prove she intended to commit fraud." "What kind of proof do we need?" "Phone conversations, email records, financial transactions, anything that clearly shows this was orchestrated, not accidental." That night, while digging, through HOA materials for her school project, Naomi made a startling discovery. "Dad, look at this. The original HOA was officially dissolved in 1994. A new HOA was set up in 1995, but with completely different rules." "What does that imply?" "It means Karen's been acting under outdated or fake authority. And get this, there are 2 separate charters filed for our community. Karen submitted one that gives her sweeping control, but there's another, from actual residents, that restricts land transfers." "Wait, 2 charters?" "She faked an HOA structure while the legitimate one was quietly maintained by the community. She's been running a fake board for 30 years. The next morning, I went back to the county clerk's office with Elsie Marlowe, the retired records expert. We combed through ownership histories and financial documents. What we found was damning. Karen had used HOA funds to purchase property for herself through shell corporations. Elsie then located a 1987 deed restriction that banned all development beyond single-family homes in our subdivision. "Every sale Karen arranged violates that clause," Elsie confirmed. "Legally, those condos can't be built here." The most explosive revelation came in a separate folder. Clear proof Karen had paid off county planning staff to greenlight developments that should have been blocked. That evening, Darius King called me again. "I've got recordings of our calls," he said. "I made them in case things ever went sideways. You'll want to hear this." We met at a local cafe. King played one of the clips. Karen's voice came through crystal clear. "He doesn't get a vote. I'll push the sale through with or without his consent." "Why are you handing this over to me?" I asked him. "I refuse to be part of a criminal operation. She promised me the community center contract if I stayed quiet." I brought the audio to Margaret. "With this," she said, "we don't just have enough to charge her with fraud and conspiracy, we can dismantle the entire network." To solidify our position, I continued acquiring abandoned lots through my LLC. That gave me standing to challenge her illegal developments in court. At the next HOA meeting, Karen appeared completely unaware of what was coming. She beamed as she delivered updates about community progress and developer partnerships. When questioned about the construction in my yard, she dismissed it with her usual slick rehearsals. Mr. Vance's property adjustment was reviewed and approved properly. Naturally, some individuals oppose change, but we can't allow personal objections to block broader improvements. "What sort of improvements?" Mrs. Patterson asked from the back. "The changes allow for enhanced drainage systems and better utility access. It's highly technical, something most residents wouldn't grasp without an engineering background." After the meeting, Naomi approached her with her phone camera, pretending she was filming for her civics assignment. "Mrs. Thorne, could you explain how boundary changes are decided?" she asked, playing innocent. "It's really quite straightforward, dear. When a homeowner requests adjustments for access to utilities or property upgrades, The HOA has full discretion to authorize reasonable modifications that benefit the neighborhood as a whole. And who decides what's considered reasonable? The board evaluates each request on a case-by-case basis, taking into account factors such as property values, neighborhood aesthetics, and community-wide improvement. Of course, individuals like your father sometimes get overly emotional about these small adjustments. That's exactly why we rely on professional management to make impartial decisions. But don't homeowners need to approve any changes that affect their land? Well, technically, yes. But by choosing to live in an HOA community, they're agreeing to abide by certain standards and policies. Your father agreed to those terms when he purchased the property. But what if someone never actually approved the specific change? Karen's expression stiffened slightly. I'm confident your father will understand once he reviews the documents. Occasionally, paperwork gets lost in the mail, but we maintain excellent records. Naomi captured it all on her phone. Karen's patronizing tone, the obvious falsehoods, and her subtle acknowledgement that homeowner consent was necessary were all recorded perfectly. 2 weeks later, I received a certified envelope from the HOA demanding $1,500 in processing fees related to the so-called boundary adjustment. I called Karen immediately, this time without masking my fury. I'm not paying a cent for falsified paperwork. Mr. Vance, your refusal to comply with legitimate HOA procedures is creating disruption within the community. If the fee isn't paid within 10 business days, we'll be forced to initiate a lien against your home. You want to put a lien on land you illegally took from me? I don't appreciate the accusatory language. The boundary modification was properly executed under our community protocols. What protocols? Show me the clause in the HOA bylaws that says you can transfer an owner's property without their permission. The board has broad powers to manage shared community resources for the benefit of all members. My backyard isn't a communal asset. It's private property. That's open to legal interpretation. No, Karen, that's not an interpretation. That's felony fraud. Her audacity was unbelievable. Karen really thought she could steal my land, bill me for it, and threaten my daughter when I stood up to her. The following morning, I filed a formal quiet title lawsuit, asserting wrongful conveyance of my property. But I added a move Karen hadn't foreseen. I challenged the chain of ownership for her home, since it sat within the 300-foot radius affected by the dispute. The court filing required an official title search on all neighboring properties within the boundary zone, Karen's house included, located just 200 feet behind mine. Once she received notice, she called me in a rage. How dare you drag my personal home into your ridiculous lawsuit? It's not ridiculous. The court must review all properties that could be impacted by the disputed line. My house has zero connection to your yard. That's for the title search to determine. Unless, of course, you've got something to hide about how you acquired it. Her long, silent pause said more than words. Margaret had already begun digging into Karen's property history, and what she uncovered was explosive. Karen's mortgage rests on a fraudulent deed, Margaret explained. She used $60,000 of HOA reserve funds to buy her lot in 2003 and then transferred the deed into the name of a shell company she secretly controlled. How did she get away with that? She's been embezzling from HOA dues for personal gain, all while raising resident fees annually. Meanwhile, my LLC had been acquiring tax lien certificates on Karen's property, which she hadn't paid taxes on for 3 consecutive years. The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in May. The presiding judge, Lynn Redding, was known for her no-nonsense stance on corruption. Karen showed up with a high-priced attorney, exuding confidence as she took her place. Your Honor, her lawyer began, this case is a minor boundary disagreement that has been blown entirely out of proportion. Judge Redding reviewed the documentation meticulously. Mr. Vance, present your case. I handed over a packet filled with falsified signatures, recorded conversations, and financial records showing Karen's self-dealing with HOA funds. Your Honor, this is systematic corruption. The HOA president forged my signature to unlawfully transfer my land. I played the audio of Darius King's recorded call, where Karen clearly stated, I'll make sure the transfer goes through with or without his cooperation. Judge Redding's expression darkened as she turned toward Karen. Mrs. Thorne, did you falsify Mr. Vance's signature? Your Honor, if there was a clerical mistake, it certainly wasn't intentional. The handwriting analysis confirms intentional forgery, the judge replied coldly. This constitutes fraud. Her ruling was swift and firm. The land transaction was nullified and the property returned to me. Karen was ordered to reimburse all legal costs and restitution. In light of the evidence of financial mismanagement, Judge Redding continued, I am initiating a full forensic audit of the HOA's accounts. Mrs. Thorne's mortgage is invalidated as the purchase was funded with misappropriated money. Karen leapt from her chair. You can't void my mortgage. It was paid with stolen funds, Judge Redding replied icily. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position as HOA president. The audit was completed within 30 days, and it confirmed Karen had embezzled over $300,000 from the HOA. She was soon arrested on multiple felony charges. At the foreclosure sale, my LLC placed the highest bid on her property, just $1 over the balance remaining on her fraudulent mortgage.